There's a comment last night on YouTube said, well, so much for that must-win game. I can't say I disagree. Pitt had a must-win game last night at the Peterson Event Center when the Panthers hosted Syracuse. The Panthers didn't win. Now, not that they weren't in trouble before, not that they didn't have big questions to answer before, but the situation's looking pretty dire. There's a lot of games left to play, but it's not looking great. Let's talk about what happened last night at the Pete. Let's talk about what happened against Syracuse, and let's talk about what Pitt needs to do to turn around this 1-5 start in ACC play on today's Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. The sun came up, or at least I think it's going to come up today after Pitt's loss last night. Not going to be any warmer than it was last night, but you know the cold temperatures outside were matched by Pitt's shooting inside. That's pretty good. I should have saved that one. Should have used that line for later in the episode. You know the deal, though. Of course, we're here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's where we put all of our Pitt video content all day, every day. We have videos rolling out here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have the Morning Pitt videos that we do here Monday through Friday, every day of the week, just a little bit of Pitt sports talk to get your day started. Our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. We'll have that tonight. Me and Jim Hammett will get together, and you can join with your comments and questions and talk about everything going on in Pitt sports. We'll be talking about this game last night, the Pitt-Syracuse game. We'll be talking about the new hires on the football coaching staff. Finally, 3 hires made to fill out those 3 open spots on the offensive side. Jim and I will talk about that. Transfer portal, recruiting, general Pitt topics, and of course, your comments and questions. You can be a part of it. It's almost like a little talk show, or it's like a call-in show almost. This is the talk show. The Morning Pitt is the talk show. The live streams are the call-in show, and we always look forward to doing that. So you can be a part of it tonight. Right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll have post-game shows like after the Duke game this Saturday. We'll go live for a little while, 45 minutes or an hour, and talk about the game. And you can join us for that. And it all happens right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So we always ask you to like this video, and I hope you do that. But we also ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you do that, you can turn on notifications, get an alert sent to your phone, and you will never miss any of our Pitt video content. And then the website, of course, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with other Pitt fans. Hundreds and thousands of Pitt fans all day, every day are on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com talking about Pitt sports. It's the best online community of Pitt fans you're going to find. And it's, the place to go. If you want to talk to other Pitt fans, that's the place to do it. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So Pitt lost to Syracuse last night, 69-58 at the Peterson Event Center. Disappointing performance. 3rd time out of the last 4 games they've scored less than 60 points, and not surprisingly, those were all losses. They managed 73 in the last Syracuse game, but couldn't get that. Couldn't top 60 against North Carolina, Duke, or now Syracuse the second time. And as is so often the case with this team, it was an offensive slump. And I'm not going to, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Pitt's offense here today and probably going forward because it's a major issue. I don't want to let the defense off the hook. I don't want to let the defense off the hook. Syracuse shot 47% in the game last night, 10 of 17 from 3. That's almost 60% from 3. A pretty atypical performance from Syracuse. I think they were averaging about 4 3-pointers per game in conference play this season. They made 10 last night. I think they, as Jeff Capel pointed out after the game, they made 6 in the first half when they were averaging 4 per game in conference play so far. And so an uncharacteristic performance from Syracuse. Guys like J.J. Starling, scored 17 points. Benny Williams had 7 points, which was more than he has really produced all season, basically in ACC play. But as Jeff Capel pointed out, that seems like it's becoming a bit of a trend. And there are defensive issues with this team. I think there are some things that they're just not very good at defending. But more often than not, where those defensive issues seem to come from is when they're struggling on offense. And then the the issues on offense, the frustration on offense carries over to how they're playing on defense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big problem. And it's a hard thing for players to overcome, particularly young players, but I think even older players fall victim to it, that when the shots aren't falling, they start to lag on defense. I think Jamie Dixon managed to get his players to avoid that, probably Ben Hallen as well. But it's uncommon for players to avoid falling into that trap of, oh, my shot's not falling, or our shots are not falling, or we're getting empty possessions. It's hard to then bring that energy on the defensive end. You make a few shots, you start defending a little bit better, you've got a little bit more energy, and you're a little bit more fired up down there. But when you miss, you start slacking a little bit. And I think that has happened with this team multiple times. I think it happened in the Duke game, and I think it happened last night against Syracuse. But they still held them under 70 points. Syracuse scored 69 points despite shooting 47% from the floor, despite shooting 59% from three. They scored 69 points, and that's a credit to Pitt. It's good that they held them under 70, but it's not good when you score less than 60. And that was the biggest problem. And if you want to get into sort of the specifics and the particulars of that game last night, it was really the final 10 minutes of the first half. Pitt was up 20-14 after Ishmael Leggett hit a three with about 10 minutes to go. 10-17, I think, was the mark. And they only made 2 field goals the rest of the half. 2 field goals in the final 10 minutes. And I think, both were made by Will Jeffress. So that your offense for the final 10 minutes of the first half was Will Jeffress. Some nice passing, and Guillermo Diaz-Graham ultimately got the assist, I believe, on Jeffress's first basket. And then Ishmael Leggett set him up for another one. But that was the point right there. And I believe, it was 20-14. Syracuse ended up going on a 23-6 run over the final 10 minutes of the first half. And that's the difference in the game. If you want to get into the specifics of how they lost that game, when that game was lost, it was lost right there in that stretch, those 10 minutes. Pitt played, they had, as I say, a 6-point lead heading into those final 10 minutes. They played Syracuse even in the second half, 32-32. So you say, where did the game get away from Pitt? Where did Pitt lose the game? It was in that stretch. And everybody contributed in that stretch. We're going to talk about Blake Hinson. We're going to talk about Bub Carrington and this and that. But after Leggett hit that three, I basically can name almost every guy on the roster who missed a shot in the final 10 minutes. Pitt was 2 of 12 from the floor, with a missed 3 from Guillermo Diaz-Graham, a missed jump shot from Jalen Lowe, a missed 3 from Carrington, a missed 3 from Hinson, a missed jumper from Hinson, a missed layup from Leggett, a missed 3 from Carrington, a missed 3 from Hinson, 2 more missed 3s from Carrington, and that was it. I started going into the second half. But those 10 missed shots, Diaz-Graham, Lowe, Carrington, Hinson, Leggett. 5 different guys missed buckets, missed shots in there. And Carrington missed 4, Hinson missed 3. And those 2 guys obviously are going to get a lot of attention from us as we talk about this game last night and talk about the various issues facing Pitt right now. But that 10-minute stretch, they just couldn't make shots. And so they lost. That's the specifics of what happened last night. Sort of very specifically about that game. Like I say, though, within that 10-minute stretch, you had 4 missed shots from Bub Carrington and 3 missed shots from Blake Hinson. And now we start to pull back a little bit and look at not just what happened in last night's game, but what is happening with this team and where some of their biggest issues are coming from. Because Carrington and Hinson, well, let's say it this way, Hinson and Carrington, Pitt's top 2 leading scorers in that order this season, combined to go 4 of 27 from the floor and score a grand total of 12 points. All 12 of those points were from Hinson, who shot 4 of 17 from the floor and 2 of 11 from 3. Carrington did not score. First game in his career that he's been shut out. 0 of 10 from the floor, and 7 of his 10 attempts were from beyond the arc. He did have 7 rebounds and 2 assists. But Pitt simply can't win games when Blake Hinson and Bub Carrington combine to score 12 points. It's not going to happen. If those 2 guys combine to shoot 4 of 27 which is, about a fifth of Pitt's total made field goals, and, more than a third of their total field goal attempts, they're not going to win. They're not going to win with that kind of shooting performance from Hinson and Carrington. Those guys are too important to this team. Their production is too crucial to this team. And when they don't produce, Pitt loses. And that's what you had last night. And so, very specifically, that loss last night happened because of that 10-minute stretch where they only made 2 field goals. You pull back and say, well, they, on a broader level, they lost because Hinson and Carrington did not produce. And then you start getting into some bigger trends around this team. So often we've talked about last year's team compared to this year's team. And, early in the season, we talked about how this year's team would compare to last year's team and what they might be able to do better, where they might struggle, where last year's team, how it found its success, how would this year's team replicate that success or surpass that success? What ways would this year's team find to be successful? And the one thing I think we've seen that has emerged through 17 games now is the role that Nelly Cummings and Jamarius Burton played on this team. And it was something we talked a lot about in the offseason, and how they would replace it, how they would replace that leadership. And I think we've touched on it a couple times over the past few weeks when we talk about Blake Hinson and his scoring struggles. And the one thing I think you could count on from Cummings and Burton, and maybe Burton a little bit more than Cummings, but Cummings could do this too, is when the other team was on a run, they could step up and make a shot to stop it. And I think their leadership shone through. Their on-court, in-game leadership showed itself in those moments where they made that pull-up jumper for Burton, or whatever shot Cummings might make driving, or making a good pass to set up a shot that ends a run. And Jeff Cable talked last night about, Pitt needs to be physically tougher and mentally tougher. And I think this is, what they need right now. And I think the physical toughness and the mental toughness plays into it, is somebody who, when they need a shot, can get a shot, can drive to the hoop, can drive through contact, can finish around the rim, can drive and pull up from the elbow and drain a jump shot. And we've seen Ishmael Leggett do some of those things some of the time, and we've seen Bub Carrington do some of those things some of the time, and we've seen Jalen Lowe do some of those things some of the time, particularly in the second half last night when he scored 16 points. And Jalen Lowe is one of the bright spots last night. We'll talk about him. But we've seen these guys do some of these things some of the time, but we haven't seen them do it consistently enough to emerge in that role. And in a post-game conversation, I was talking to Chris Carter and Noah Hiles, the guys from the Post-Gazette, and I think we all kind of came to this conclusion that there's a difference between being a team's leading scorer and being a team's leader. Blake Hinson was last year's leading scorer. He was Pitt's leading scorer last season, but he wasn't the team's leader. He was one of their leaders, but he was not the team's leader. That was Cummings or that was Burton. Because of those things, because of what they did off the court for sure, but because of the impact they could have when the team needed them to step up, they could step up. And then you do it every game because obviously, they lost a bunch of games, and there were plenty of times when they could have used them to step up against Michigan or West Virginia or Miami or Notre Dame. You can run Virginia, you can run down the list, but they were pretty reliable for doing it. Blake Hinson has not been reliable in that role. And I wonder, and Jeff Capel talked about it a little bit last night, about the pressure, maybe the pressure getting to Blake Hinson, maybe Blake Hinson putting it on himself where he feels like he needs to step up and be the guy, that if the team is struggling, he needs to be the one who makes the shot. He needs to be the one who takes it on and lifts the team. And it's great to have that mentality. And I don't want to say Blake Hinson should stop shooting or Blake Hinson should have reduced minutes, partially because I don't really know who you're going to replace him with. But when he shoots 4 of 17 and scores 12 points and 2 of 11 from 3, that's not helping the team. He helps the team when the shot goes down. And the shot didn't go down last night, and it hasn't been going down. And I think it's something this team is lacking. Now, I very much believe that Bub Carrington can grow into that kind of player. I very much believe that Jalen Lowe can grow into that kind of player. And in the second half last night, I mean, Pitt scored 32 points. Let me double check just to make sure about this because it's pretty ridiculous. Pitt scored 32 points in the second half. Jalen Lowe had half of those. He was 7 of 13 from the floor, 2 of 2 from the free throw line. He had 3 rebounds and 3 assists. So Pitt in the second half made 13 baskets. Jalen Lowe scored 7 and assisted on 3 more. So 10 out of Pitt's 13 field goals in the second half, Jalen Lowe was involved, one way or the other. Those guys can do it, but they're not there yet where they can do it at a consistent basis because they're young. They're freshmen. They're not at that level yet. I believe they can get to that level. And it would be great if they got to that level at Pitt next year. But as we've often said, tomorrow's roster isn't promised to anyone. But they're not at that level now. And Pitt doesn't have those guys who are at that level. So when they need a basket because they're in a 10-minute drought where they've only made 2 field goals, they don't have that guy who can step up. They're getting field goals from Will Jeffress. When they're in the second half and they cut it to 8, right? Because they cut it to 8 on a Jalen Lowe drive and then a pull-up jumper. He scored back-to-back. Pitt was down 12, and Jalen Lowe scored back-to-back field goals to cut it to 8. Syracuse went on a run. You know, they hit three baskets in a row, 3 and 2 twos, and now all of a sudden it's a 15-point game again in the span of like 3 minutes. They needed somebody in that stretch. After Lowe cut it to 8, they need somebody else to keep that pressure on. They need to get a stop on defense, and then they need to come down and make a basket and finish a play. And they had multiple possessions, and that was that stretch with the offsetting technicals. There were multiple possessions in there where they could have kept chipping away, but they didn't have anybody who could make those shots. And again, less than 4 minutes to go, right around the 4-minute media timeout, Jalen Lowe drives on a fast break and gets an and one, and it's a 9-point game. It's 3:43 to play. 9 points with 3:43 to play is not ideal. That's a lot of ground to make up, but it's not over. You can make that ground up. But instead, they bricked it. They didn't have anybody who could make that shot, and Lowe tried to pull up for a really long J that wasn't really a good shot. It wasn't a good decision, but that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to be that guy. And I think several players are trying to be that guy. I think Bub Carrington tries to be that guy. I think Jalen Lowe tries to be that guy. I think Blake Hinson tries to be that guy, but none of them, not one of those guys is that guy yet. You know, with Carrington and Lowe, not yet. Hinson, I don't know if that's really the role he's going to be able to fill. And so you run into this problem now where a team that is just okay defensively, but very much allows its offense to impact its defense, you know, thereby relying heavily on the offense to carry the team. This team has now scored less than 60 in 3 out of the last 4 games. This team is struggling to find its offensive flow. It's struggling to find its offensive groove. It's not getting what it needs out of its leading scorer, and its next 2 top offensive weapons are freshman guards who are still figuring it out. Oh, and the other guy is a transfer guard who's been hurt, and so has been slowed that way. They just don't have any. They don't have enough options right now. They don't have enough consistent, reliable options right now. And so you get to where they are. And I'm not really sure, you know, the turnaround that would happen this year, if a turnaround happens this year, it's going to be because Hinson gets hot again and those freshman guards take some big steps forward. Leggett could be a part of it. Leggett played well early. You know, I think he had 8 points pretty early in the game, and then just sort of disappeared. And so they could use more from him, but that's just, you need Hinson to score. You need Carrington to score. And you'd like Lowe to continue, you know, ascending the way he has been. He scored 20 points, a career high. He was the game's leading scorer last night. And you know, he played great in the second half. But there has to be more than that. It can't just be that one guy. Just like it couldn't just be Blake Hinson or it couldn't just be Carlton Carrington. It also can't just be Jalen Lowe. They need all of those guys going, and they need Leggett chipping in points, and they need Zach Austin getting his chaos points. And occasionally, they might need a big to score. Occasionally. Yeah. Beggars not going to be choosers here. Get some reliable, consistent production out of Hinson, Carrington, and Lowe, and we'll work from there. Now they go to Duke. Go to Duke on Saturday. So it's a tough go. And we're not going to sit here on the day after the Syracuse game and do big picture recaps of Jeff Capel's time at Pitt, but I can't fault you if you're thinking about those things. I can't fault you if you're asking those questions. I wrote, and I'll leave it on this. I wrote in the 3-2-1 column last week that, there was a time where you could have a year like this. A time where, you're replacing a bunch of senior guards. You've got a bunch of freshman guards. It's going to take a little bit of time for those guys to grow and learn how to play and all that stuff. There was a time where you could have a season like this and you would look forward to the future and be like, well, this is a rough one, but those guys, they're going to be a lot better next year. And then when they're juniors, look out. I mean, this team is going to be really, really dangerous. But that's not how it is in 2023, 2024. For one, you don't know who's going to be on your roster next year. And for two, we're putting this season in the context of Jeff Capel's tenure at Pitt. And like I said, we're not going to go too far on the big picture stuff like that. But it's year 6. And, there's a little less patience for a year like this when, a season like this when you're in year 6 and you have the lack of success that Capel has had in 4 out of the last 5 years. So those conversations will get louder. We'll talk about them more and more. In the meantime, Blake Hinson needs to score. Bub Carrington needs to score. Jalen Lowe needs to score. They're all capable. I know that. They're all very talented basketball players. They're all very good basketball players. They need to produce. All right. We will keep it moving this week. Of course, don't forget we have the live stream tonight. We'll talk about Pitt basketball on that for sure, me and Jim Hammett and you. So tune in. We'd love to have you join the conversation right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We start at 8 o'clock tonight, so don't forget about that. 8 p.m. start, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then check out the website, Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. for all the Pitt sports news. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We appreciate it, and we will catch up with you tonight for the live stream, and then we'll be back right here for the Morning Pitt tomorrow on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.